Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be with all of you. Be back in India. Very happy. So today I want to tell you a little bit about both what we're thinking about for the Venice Biennale next year, that I will curate starting in May next year, and I hope to see a lot of you there. But also more generally about this kind of what we think is the key challenge we have today in architecture and in design, which is blending these two worlds, the world of the natural and the world of the artificial. Now, first of all, I want to tell you about cities. You know, we look at design at different scales. We look at product design. We look at buildings. We look at cities. But if you think about cities, just remember 4 numbers about cities. And those are the numbers, 3, 55, 75, and 80. Cities are only 3% of the surface of the planet, so a small portion of our planet, but they're 55% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, 80% of CO2 emissions. So we can do something to make our cities a little bit more sustainable. Well, that can be really a big deal. And the way we can do it is really by looking at the intersection that I'll show in a moment between natural and artificial. That's what we're passionate about, both in terms of research. We do it at MIT, at Senseable City Lab. That's Cambridge, Massachusetts, where MIT is. But we got a few small labs around the world, in Cambridge, in Milan, in Dubai, in Amsterdam, Stockholm, and in Singapore. But also we do it with our design office at CRA in Turin, in New York, and small base in London. So let's look at this relationship between natural and artificial. Now, anybody knows, well, first of all, a small quote. It's a quote from a very well-known French artist, geographer, and activist at the end of the 19th century, Élisée Reclus, who say, man should have the double advantage of access to the pleasures of the city, and at the same time should be able to enjoy the freedom that lies in the freedom of nature, and which is explained in the field of its vast horizon. So somehow, again, this idea of how we combine life in the city, life in nature, or if you want, the world of the natural and the artificial. And now, anybody knows what this picture is? There's a lot of architects in the room. Yes, so yes, it's Frank Lloyd Wright. So that's Frank Lloyd Wright with Broadacre City, so that's the beginning of the 20th century. And here again, you see this intention of blending architecture with nature. Now, if you look at that, at the time of big urban development, the idea was, let's take our cities and blend them outside with nature. But we know what happened then. What happened then is actually we destroyed all what was outside our cities. That idea resulted in a lot of this. Suburbia, they destroyed in the United States, all over the world, a lot of the green we had next to our cities. So I would argue that today we got a different challenge. And the challenge is how to find a better mix between the two worlds, and probably not anymore the cities expanding outwards in nature, but keeping the footprint of the city more or less as it is, especially perhaps a bit less in India, but in many countries in Europe, in the United States, where population is not growing that much, and actually doing the opposite, so bringing nature back to the core of our cities. And so I want to share with you a few projects that look at this dimension. I decided I did this project at the last minute because this is actually the first time we crossed paths with Paul. That was 20 years ago. It was in 2008, almost 20 years ago. That was in Milan. It was the first project we did with Patrick Blanc. Patrick Blanc, as you might know, is a French botanist who developed this way to do vertical gardens, to bring green in places where normally you couldn't grow it. So this is actually in Milan. It's for the Trussardi fashion house. It's in the center of Milan, next to the Duomo and the Piazza della Scala. And here the idea was, can we bring nature in a new way? There's quite a bit of technology behind to do it, but you don't see it. There's something we're discussing with you, with the family today. Technology is very important, not as a goal, but actually as it allows us to do new things. In this case, how it can help us to bring basically like a green cloud to create something like an urban living room. You see it here, you can go there, you can have a coffee, you can work, you can meet friends, and meet nature in the center of Milan in different ways. Incidentally, that was that small square, which is adjacent to Piazza della Scala, the Scala Square, was full of cars. And so as that was pedestrianized, basically for every car, we put 1 square meter of green there in the middle of the city. This is a project we just finished. We did a collaboration with BIG and in Singapore. It's the tallest building in Singapore. And here the idea was similar. So basically in the middle of the building, we had a space. And the question was, what do we do with that space? And one of the things I usually suffer, we got a base, a research base, as you saw before in Singapore, is that in Singapore, when you're in the building, many times it looks like you're in a fish tank. Everything is sealed, you're closed, you cannot touch nature, you cannot feel the outside. As humans, we're not programmed for that. We're actually programmed for thousands and thousands a year for something very different. in the way we interact with the environment. And so the idea was, in the middle, say, well, why don't you leave a place that's open? And it becomes like a plaza. Think about a piazza, an Italian piazza, but it becomes like a vertical one. It's up there, suspended on the top of Singapore. It is also filled with nature. There's a piece of tropical forest over there. You see it here. So you can go there, you can meet other people, there's places for working. Now it has become like a tourist attraction, so a lot of people go there in order to visit it. You can move through it and again meet people with nature in different ways. The same thing happens also at the entrance, at the ground of the building. You see how it touches the ground, and again, the blend between the building and nature. And the same thing also, you see it opens up like naturally to let nature in, and the same happens also at the top. You see a little video here. The video was taken just a few months after completion, but if you go there, you see this kind of nature. There's thousands of trees, and they're really blossoming, growing very, very big inside the building that, again, opens up to let them grow. And you can see at a different level, at the ground level, at the middle level. Of course, the spring is called Capital Spring. Capitaland is the developer, but the spring is the part in the middle, this kind of green spring. But also the top, the rooftop, where, again, you can enjoy nature. You can go there. Some of the restaurant there grows quite a bit of the food for the restaurants there. So it's also become a place for farming locally at the top and overlooking Singapore from the highest point. So they take that as, again, as one of some of the main experiments we are doing in this space about blending between the natural and the artificial. Some interesting experiments we've done in a very interesting setting. As some of you might eat the Mutti tomato products. They're kind of the very high-end tomato products, made in Italy and sold globally. And actually, we started working with Mutti a few years ago when they asked us for help to rethink all of their factories, all of their campus. Somehow, as we've seen also yesterday, the way you produce is vital. And the values you got on the floor where you're producing things, producing tabs, producing light, producing tomato sauce, those are the values that are in what you're selling, what you're doing in your company, the values you own yourself. And so we started working with them. We work on the factory. The factory is still under renovation, which is what you see here, actually bringing the product at the center. But what we learned by doing this is actually, in this case, again, when you think about tomato sauce, everything goes back to farming, everything goes back to nature. You cannot do anything within that. And so it's about nature, it's about sustainability, it's about the quality of things, and about also the enjoyment, at the end, the passion by which you do things and enjoy them in the end. So we won an international competition for this, but then kind of that became like a broader brief, and became how can we think about the whole, call it campus. Many Italian companies are actually working in that sense, turning into campus. You think about Brunello Cucinelli in fashion, think about Zegna, think about how you can put together all the parts in a physical place, all the places where you produce, where you live, where the people are, and create an ecosystem. Ultimately, it's about the network and how your values through the networks can be brought and given to the world. And so from that, that developed into also the house for the CEO, for Mr. Mutti, which is next to the factory. The house is actually an traditional Italian house that has to be transformed. As I was saying, the value is about nature and the blending with nature. So you see here, the house is the old one, just being refurbished with some additions, opening up this big place. That one is called Asino Piero. Piero is the donkey that they've been having it for a long time, and it's part of the family there as well. But then also it becomes a way to blend between outside and inside. So as you see here, the inside is, the whole architecture is around a tree, which is a 50-meter high tree, a ficus. Again, almost like a sacred ficus from India. This is from Spain. But basically it becomes a place to organize all the space. And there are different ways. If you look at that, you're eating a bit lower than the level of the ground. You're 1.1 meter down. So when you're on the table, incidentally, that table is 50,000-year-old. Is a fossil table, from New Zealand. And then you're eating there on the table, and at the same time, you're at the level of the place outside, the green, the nature, and the nature enters inside with the tree. There was a for those of you who are architects, you might remember the architecture by Adolf Loos, a great architect, Austrian architect from the beginning of the 20th century. And Adolf Loos in Germany had this idea of round plan, how you do a plan that moves into space. Well, if you want, this is something similar, but the round plan, unlike Loos, where this kind of round, the space was empty space with these three-dimensional shapes in the middle. This is about round plan that are nature. That tree becomes the way to organize all of the plans in all of the space inside the house. And then from there, it became also something we opened just a few weeks ago. So the house was a couple of years ago. And then a few weeks ago, we just opened this, which was the canteen. And again, when you do a company canteen, usually there's not much to do. You just do a place, and people don't invest much. Here, I thought it was very interesting. By talking, the best projects come through discussion. For instance, yes, it was very exciting, some discussions we had with Joanna, with Paul, with all of you visiting the factory. So somehow that's where the best ideas come from. They come through conversations. And so I remember talking to Mr. Mutti and say, well, of course you want to improve the canteen, but what are the things you want to bring to the people working in the factory? And at one point, this idea came out, well, if really food is at the center, which is the ethos of the company, they should be reflected here in a place where people eat. So basically got a 3 Michelin star chef, one of the top chefs in the world, to work on the menu and work on the building. Again, here the building was, how do you deal with nature? So the idea was very simple. You see here, that's, again, an old house that is open in the corner. The kitchen becomes the opening, very visible. You see it in a moment built. The kitchen looks at the street. But in the other part of the building, we said, what is the most basic building we can do? You take a piece of landscape, you just imagine, you cut it, just 1.2 meters, you cut it, you raise it, and just eat there. Think about a beautiful painting about déjeuner sur l'herbe. Imagine this is déjeuner sous l'herbe. So under the grass and under the landscape, you're just raising that, and that becomes a building. So that was a starting point a couple of years ago. We started working on it. Here you see it built. This was just a few weeks ago. You see some of the things. The green is still growing. You see the land. It's really, that's really the earth, the local earth as a building material, just raised. Of course, you need to consolidate it in a natural way. And you see the places underneath where you're eating again at the level more or less of the green. Still, again, the green is growing. Here you see the other corner. The funny thing today is sometimes you cannot tell what is a rendering, what is reality. This is the real thing a couple of weeks ago. And here you see also the kitchen with this amazing chef preparing things, facing the road, but also opening up on the other side to the landscape. And then I wanted to finish with a couple of additional things. We saw it before. Sometimes you need technology, but technology should never be a goal in its own, but it's a way to do new things. What is important is the values, the experience, how touch, and the emotions that are attached in the end. So in this case, in this project, was a lot of technology, but ultimately it was just a very, if you want, a very poetic idea. Can we do a garden in the center of Milan? This was actually in 2018, just before COVID. It's a Milan Design Week, Salone. And then we had the opening act of Salone in 2018. And the question was, can you do a garden where you got 4 seasons at the same time? Imagine a place where as you're moving through the garden, you go from spring to summer to fall to winter. It's almost walking through space, it becomes like walking through time. And so these were initial sketches. What you see there is the Royal Palace of Milan. To the left, you see it there a little bit is the Duomo, the cathedral. So this is Piazza del Duomo. These were the initial sketches with the idea, again, you got these kind of four elements, and you are able to have, again, the four seasons at the same time. You see, this is like the fall with the leaves, and this is the winter with real snow, or the summer that you see to the left. How do you do it? Well, you see it here being built. We want to talk about two important things. The first one is what we saw before. Not anymore the city goes out eating and destroying nature, but actually nature coming back into the city. So what a better place than the center of Milan, the Duomo, to bring nature in, to do an unexpected garden in the center of Milan. But the other thing is, here you got a lot of technology, because if you want to have four seasons at the same time, you need to be able to control climate. So you got the real winter with snow, and you got the summer and so on. And the interesting thing is that, one, you can do it by getting, you see the photovoltaics on the roof, so you produce a lot of energy in a sustainable way on the roof. And the second thing that becomes interesting is that, think about your refrigerator. When you're opening the door, it got some cooling, some cold, but on the other side, it produces a lot of heating. So you need to look in a way that basically, when you're getting the cooling for the winter, you're using it for the summer to heat the summer and vice versa. So it's almost, everything is self-contained, and just change the climate, modulate the climate. For us, it was an important way to say two things. As I said, the first thing, how we can bring back nature into the core of our cities. But the other thing is also how we can control microclimate. This is an important thing. We've all seen the heat waves in this country, in India. In our office in Rio de Janeiro a few weeks ago, there were 65 degrees Celsius. I mean, 65 was more. 45 was the actual temperature plus humidity, but perceived was 65. Well, none of us would survive in 65 degrees Celsius more than a few minutes or a few hours. So the idea was, can we actually find new ways to basically change microclimate in a natural way, and again, turn that then in the visible fact of a garden, they would have four seasons at the same time, where just by moving through space, you would almost move through time, from spring to summer, as I say, to fall to winter. And you see here the thing, this was built, it was as an axis to go to the Royal Palace. We had a big opening for that year, for Milan Design Week in the Royal Palace, with some of the things. This was 29 degrees was the summer. We wanted to have a real sweaty summer, Milanese summer, also with mosquitoes. The winter was really cold with real snow. And this was, of course, the spring and the fall. I'll show you a little video about this. So the point here is actually working with nature also means that sometimes you got, in this case, you might have technology to enable things to happen, but what is important is the experience. And also working with nature doesn't mean only working with green. Yes, green is very important. Trees is amazing, and they're probably the only hope we have in order to future-proof our cities vis-a-vis climate change. But actually, there's many other ways. And I wanted to finish with this project, and I'll tell you then a couple of things on the Venice Biennale. This project opened a few months ago in Milan. It started because for the first time, Piero Della Francesca, one of the master painters of Italian Renaissance, he actually had painted this masterpiece that got split into many museums. One part is still in Milan at the Museo Poldi Pezzoli. One piece is at the National Gallery in London. One is a Frick collection in New York. One is at National Museum in Lisbon. And so for the first time in 500 years, all the pieces came together, and came together in Milan. And we were asked actually to redesign the space and do the installation for the exhibition. And in that case, we played with a magic element that's part of nature, and that's light. And how do we play with light? So our idea was, because these things, all the masterpieces are coming back to Milan. So the first question, how do you show them? Of course, traditional way in a museum, sometimes you put them on the wall, but here we wanted to reproduce the atelier, basically the place where Piero della Francesca painted them. So we wanted to take that from Tuscany 500 years ago and somehow bring a little bit of that back into the center of Milan, where after 500 years, these pieces would go. Those pieces were in that atelier 500 years ago in Tuscany, with a certain light where he painted them. Then actually, for some time, were in a church in Tuscany, then were split all over the world, and for the first time in 500 years, they came back into the same place. So we wanted to reproduce that condition. And so what we did, actually, we started scanning the sky in real time in Tuscany, the real time, the sky, Here we work with an Italian lighting company, Artemide, to do that lighting system. New lighting system that actually changes in order to have in real time the sky from Tuscany back there. And if you go, when you were going through the exhibition that was open until a few weeks ago, actually you could see this really like, in a way, reminiscent of how it was when they were painted. You see them here, you know, by moving them, by putting them perpendicular to the wall, you create really something more similar to the atelier that Piero Della Francesca had in Tuscany 500 years. You see the beauty of these masterpieces and how they moved. Also, it was a little bit of telling the story of how all of them moved almost like people through the world. And for the first time, it was a big reunion, almost like, you know, an Indian wedding where all would come together and celebrate with all the people. It was one of the most visited exhibitions in Milan during the year. Now, so this, again, what I want to tell you, I think the most exciting thing, and actually that resonates a lot with what Paul said before, I think we can do today in architecture is how we play with this boundary between the natural and the artificial. And that's intimately related to climate change. Climate change is what happened on this planet is because we've been thinking the cities, what we built, what we do, was totally disconnected from nature. If you think about the 20th century modernism, the idea was we can impose architecture, infrastructure, cities on nature. If we find a better alliance, that's the only hope in order to, again, to find a solution, also the biggest problems we have on the planet today. And so that's going to be the theme of the Venice Biennale next year. The Venice Biennale is the main event in architecture globally, every 2 years in Venice. The theme we've been given, I picked, I'm the curator for next year, the director, I picked intelligence. Usually the title of the Biennale is both Italian and English. In this case, we actually use the Latin title, intelligence, and the reason is that we like to have only one, but also gens in Latin means multiple, means people. And so we like this idea that intelligence is about multiplicity of intelligence. Today, when you talk about intelligence, everybody say, oh yeah, you know, artificial intelligence or ChatGPT. No, intelligence is actually something much more profound. Intelligence is what architecture has been dealing with as humans. We've been dealing with for thousands of years in the way we shaped our environment. Intelligence is what happened naturally in collective intelligence, what we see in the natural world, and also what we see in the artificial world. So those are the things we're going to see. In the section about natural intelligence, we'll see a lot about natural materials, about green coming to city, but most importantly, about the logic of nature being used by architecture. It's not only about copying or integrating, it's about taking the same logic, the same principle, the same algorithms of nature, and using them in what we design. In the artificial intelligence, of course, it's the word of, well, there's a terrible word of, people say smart cities. I hate it. Our lab at MIT is called sensible cities. But, you know, but the point is about, yes, if you look at sensors, actuators, intelligence, data, that changes the way you can play with the environment. You can turn a building, a room like this one, into a room that responds dynamically like a living being. So again, the programming, in this case, of the space can become something much more similar to the natural space. And of course, collective intelligence is what we've been doing for thousands of years. Humanity, by learning from each other, by communicating, by collaborating, and by actually shaping the environment we live in. The Biennale next year will also have a few unique things, new things that were not done before. The first one you see to the left is partially open source for the first time ever. Usually the Biennale, the director needs to just pick people, the things he thinks, like a selection, or the things the director believes are the most important things in the world of architecture every 2 years. But we also wanted to hear. And again, hearing, listening, talking, the conversation I was saying before is important. So we had an open source, a call during the summer where we got, it was both beautiful and terrifying. Terrifying because we got flooded with you know, emails. You know, I'm still going through my inbox from August. You know, we wanted to reply to everybody, but we were flooded with ideas from people. But beautiful because through that, we were able to discover maybe like a young graduate from the other side of the world who had an amazing idea and will be shown next year in Venice. We've never been able to find them without the call for idea. The second thing is that if you talk about the built environment, if you talk about some of the things we are talking about today, related to sustainability, related to lighting, to how we live, well, it's not only a conversation for architects. It's a conversation for all of us. It's a conversation that's about also the future of the planet. It's that we should all be involved. So we want to actually to get, our goal is, can we reach 1 billion people? You know, usually the Biennale is seen, it reaches, you know, tens of millions globally and all the architecture community and so on, but actually, can we get 1 billion people? These topics are topics we should all be engaged with, also because they're so crucial to the future of the Earth. That's why we also want to go beyond architects. And the final thing, you know, we're trying to walk the talk. One of the things I like most about the visit to the beautiful Jaquar factories yesterday is actually that the people showing us were so proud that, you know, everything was circular, nothing was wasted. They were showing us this is waste, but actually we're reusing it. We're melting again, or, you know, or so. So, and I think, you know, what we want to do at the Biennale is to be, for the first time, zero waste. When you go to events, such as Biennales, Olympics, Expos, we've done a lot of similar events. I didn't show them today. No, thank you for picking some of the pictures from our website. That one down there will be next year, the French Pavilion, the World Expo in Japan. And but when you think about temporary events, we've done many of them, Expos, Olympics, and so on. There will be another big announcement about our involvement in the Olympics soon, in the next Olympics. But basically, then you do something, like you build an incredible thing, but a lot of stuff then goes to waste, goes to landfill after that. So what we want to do at Biennale, and we presented the New York Climate Week this year with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and ARUP, is can we actually do something where we develop a protocol so all what we use is either recycled and reused, and at the end of the Biennale, nothing will go to waste, will be recycled or reused. And I think that's very important, more and more, especially for temporary things that last a few weeks or a few months. So those are the things. There's another fun thing that you will discover. You're all invited. You'll be all my guests at the opening, 10th of May next year, and then we'll last for 6 months in Venice. But basically, one part of the Biennale, where the Biennale is called the Central Pavilion, that will be closed for refurbishment next year. And so we're using the other part, called the Arsenale, but in the Central Pavilion, we're taking all of the projects in the Central Pavilion and actually spreading them through the city. So Venice will become a living lab. And what we like is that, you know, Venice is a very magical city. Venice is a city, however, that everybody for a long time went to thinking about how do I save Venice. Think about Ruskin. John Ruskin went from the UK to Venice, wrote a beautiful book in 1848 called The Stones of Venice. And, you know, and him and many others went there with the idea of how could Venice be understood and saved. But actually, Venice is the most fragile city vis-a-vis climate change. And by the way, climate change is, you know, we know already today, Venice today is saved by a system called Mose, an operable dam called the Mose. When it was designed 50 years ago, they were planning to close it 8 times a year in order to protect from the high water the city. Today is already used 30 times a year, and because of rising sea level, it's going to be closed 300 times a year in 50 years. And then in 100 years, that will not be enough. And the city either is gone, flooded, like most coastal cities go. And so if you think about 1.5 meter of sea level rise, then most of the coastal cities are going to be gone unless we do something. And that's a big challenge for architecture. For architects, I think the big challenge we got in the next 50 or 100 years is really how do we adapt to that? For adaptation, there's no alternative, only architecture. And so our idea here was, well, can we turn Venice, the most fragile city, vis-a-vis climate change, in a lab that can develop new solutions where architects can come there, develop ideas. Ideas can be developed and deployed for Venice, but also copied and replicated in inspiring cities all over the world. Well, that's what we'll do next year, so I look forward to continuing the conversation and seeing you in Venice again in just a few months, and I'll stop here. Thank you.